Hello, my name is Mr. Chipman. I teach biology, AP Biology at Murray High School in Murray, Kentucky. This is Unit 2 cells, 2.2 cell size. Let's discuss. I think it's very important this very important concept that we're going to look at, this idea of cell size and how it affects the cell. The overall principle here is that the efficiency of a cell, both in exchanging materials with the outside world, meaning like nutrients in, waste out, energy exchange as well, has to do with the volume and the surface area specifically available relative to the volume of the cell that needs service. So what does that mean? So let's look at this, for instance, just this picture. So you have a cell, like a frog cell, right? That's a particular size, our frog egg. That egg is able to do a certain amount of work, right? It has a certain surface area that is exposed to the outside world, and that surface area is calculable, right? And then that inside of that has a certain volume, right? And the volume for that cell is going to increase a lot faster than the surface area of that cell. Let me explain. Surface area is a squared function, right? And so it goes up in that way, orders of 2. Volume is a cubed function. And so as you increase the size of the cell, the surface area is increasing by a squared function, but the volume is increasing a cubed function. So the volume is increasing a lot faster. So what eventually happens is the inside of that cell is less able to interact with the outside world as the cell gets bigger. And this causes a problem, both with getting rid of waste, both with getting materials in, with energy needs. And so what cells typically do in order to accommodate this is they will divide, right? And so we're going to look at a couple of ideas with this. So first of all, surface area to volume ratio is just a math problem. And I mentioned the general math behind this. Cubes. So the AP Bio formula sheet is just completely full of surface area and volume problems or equations, so you won't have to learn them, even though they're not very hard. But you take like a cube, and a cube, the area or the surface area, you take the area of one side, it's length times width, right? And then you multiply it by the number of sides, which is 6 in this case, 6-sided cube. And you have the surface area. The surface area of a 1 by 1 cube is 6. Right? 1 by 1 is 1 times 6 is 6. The volume of that cube is 1. 1 times 1 times 1. Length times width times height. So the surface area to volume ratio is 6 to 1, or 6. Well, let's look at the 2. So what is the surface area? It's 2 times 2 is 4 times 6 is 24. Right? So the surface area increased pretty big when you went from 1 to 2, right? It increased so it went from 6 to 24, pretty significant. What about the volume? Well, the volume is 2 times 2 times 2, which is 8, not 6, 8. So now you have 24 to 8, or 3 to 1. And so the surface area to volume ratio is getting a lot smaller, even though we just ticked up just 1 centimeter, right? Well, what about the next one? Surface area of a 3 centimeter cube is 9. 3 times 3 is 9 times 6, 54. And then what's the volume? 3 times 3 times 3 is 27. Not 9. 27. And so 54 divided by 27 is 2. So you have a 2 to 1 ratio. Notice what's happening to the ratio as we get incrementally bigger. The ratio is significantly decreasing, right? And so higher surface area to volume ratios, that's 6 to 1 being higher than 2 to 1, right, allow for more efficiency. They improve nutrient uptake, waste elimination, and they allow the cell to get rid of heat to keep heat if that's the necessary thing that needs to happen, whereas lower surface area to volume cells make diffusion, which is the uptake and release of materials, less efficient and may lead to buildup of waste, slower intake of resources. And so this way that cells overcome this is they either divide or they change the shape of their cell in order to manipulate the surface area to volume. Let's look at this. So we talked about this already. But see, this nerve cell here, because of the way that it is shaped, has a lot more surface area than volume, right? Because it's not just a round blob like this fat cell here, but it actually has some surface area. It's very skinny, right? Lots of surface area to volume. Whereas a fat cell, very little surface area compared to its volume. And so a lot of this is going to have to do with the type of cell that is being used, right? A cheek cell is going to have a certain set of goals, right, versus a nerve cell, which is going to have a lot more complicated set of tasks that it's doing. And so, like we've learned already, the shape of a cell, in this case, determines its function, and that shape is going to largely be determined by this size efficiency idea, the surface area to volume idea. So let's look at some structural adaptations that you see in living things. Mitochondria is a great example. Let's zoom in a little bit so you can see here. The inner membrane of the mitochondria has a lot of folds in it. Those folds are going to increase the surface area without increasing the volume. And so what happens? More efficiency. It's similar to having lab tables in the center of the room, like I have with my room. A lot more surface area as opposed to like having a counter around the outside of the room. Very little surface area to work compared to the amount of volume that you have. Small intestines, great example. Right? Small intestines is used by biology teachers all over the world to talk about how big things are compared to their size, right? Because it's folds. The folds are there because small intestines are used to absorb nutrients, but the folds have little folds on them, and those little folds have little folds on them, right? Lots of surface area to volume ratio there. This is also important in organism size. So let's think of an elephant, for instance. Elephant's a big animal, lots of cells, lots of cells. I don't even know. It's a lot, right? Each one of those cells is like a little factory, right? And factories create heat. And so this organism is going to have a really hard time cooling down because it's just basically making a ton of heat. How does it do that? Well, it increases the surface area that it has with the outside in order to get rid of that heat, which is why elephants have giant ears, right? What about a mouse? A mouse is going to have the opposite problem. A mouse is a lot fewer cells, a lot fewer heat, a lot less heat that's being produced. And so it's actually going to have a hard time in keeping heat inside, right? So it's smaller ears. It's a prey species, so it has to have big ears so it can hear, but small relative to body size. And so one of the ways that mice actually stay warm is they'll bundle up like this. And so what are they doing here? They're decreasing their surface area, right, by creating a ball, and they're increasing their volume, which is going to cause heat to be released less quickly, right? If they couldn't do this, they'd freeze to death. Whereas an elephant's problem is not freezing to death at all. It's the opposite. It's going to burn up to death. So it increases its surface area. Good, great idea here. Fantastic video. I need to recommend. I'll put a link to it in the description. Deals with this. It's from a YouTube channel called Kirk Kazat. It's an animated channel. 100% recommend them for science-y type things. And so this has to do with the metabolic rate. We were already talking about this. Great graph here, just dealing with that. As metabolic rate or as mass increases, right, the metabolic rate is going to decrease. Why is that? If an elephant had the metabolic rate of a mouse, it would just explode, right? So the mouse has to have an increased metabolic rate in order to stay warm. Whereas the elephant slows its metabolic rate way down in order to not burn up, right? And there's other things that are in factors there too, because that surface area to volume is so big with a mouse, so big that everything's really quickly. Surface area to volume really small with an elephant. Everything happens very slowly, less efficient, so much more slow. Mammals, interestingly enough, all have a similar number of heartbeats over the course of their life. And so that's what has to do with life expectancy. A mouse is going to have a lot lower life expectancy than an elephant, and this is directly tied to its metabolic rate, which is really just a function of surface area to volume ratio. So let's look at practice. This is the kind of problems that you'll see with this on the exam. A student compares two cube-shaped cells of different sizes. Cell A has a side length of 2, whereas cell B has a side length of 6, which the following conclusions is most directly supported by comparing their surface area to volume ratios. Before we go look at those, pause the video. Okay. Before we go down there and look at ABCD, we know that the smaller side is going to have a higher surface area to volume ratio. So cell A is going to be a more efficient cell than cell B, just based on what we know about surface area to volume ratio. So let's look. Cell A has more mitochondria. No way of knowing that. Cell B can more efficiently exchange materials, or cell A can more efficiently exchange materials with its environment than cell B. Yes, it can, because it has a higher surface area to volume ratio. B is the correct answer. I hope this was helpful. If it wasn't, if you have questions, let me know. Ask them down in the comments below. 2.3 will be coming up very shortly.